Good evening, fantasy football fans. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant. Let's see, is it powered by Pro Football Focus or brought to you by Pro Football Focus? I can never remember. But we're Michael and Scott from ProFootballFocus.com Fantasy, and brought to you by DraftKings as well. Michael, it's been just absolute free agency bedlam over the last couple of weeks while I've been hot trotting across the country for spring training visits and other baseball-related things. So, yeah, we have a lot of things to catch up on. But also, we really want to continue with our divisional previews. So I don't think we have a ton of chance for idle banter to start the show. Michael, let's just go ahead and start covering this. Let's get things started with the major gainers and losers from free agency, keeping in mind that we're going to go into more depth with this as we continue with the division-by-division breakdown. We're going to hit the AFC South and NFC South today. We hit the AFC West and NFC West maybe 4 weeks ago. And I promise we're going to get all of this in before the draft in a couple of months. Michael, try to give you a chance to talk here. Why don't you get us started? Who were some of your major gainers from the moves they've made in free agency so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the obvious ones. My first one would probably be Russell Wilson, who even though he's been pretty good with a lackluster receiving core, adding Jimmy Graham through that trade with the Saints, I think, is pretty substantial. I mean, that's what Russ Wilson owners have been pining for, is somebody they can rely on in the passing game. And look, I think they probably got it at this point. Now, will Jimmy Graham match his numbers from New Orleans? Probably not, just because the volume won't be there. But do I think it's provides some stability for Russell Wilson? Yeah, I liked Wilson before, which is hard for me to say as a 49er fan. But no, that just helps his case, I think.
Yeah, the analogous thing here is, you mentioned a little bit with Graham, but Drew Brees losing quite a lot of weaponry this offseason. Brees has been very successful even before Jimmy Graham made it to the Saints, back when Marcus Colston was the number one receiver on the team, and maybe he can do that again. We'll get into this in more depth when we talk about the Saints later in the show, but I think Brees has to be the primary quarterback loser of the free agency period. Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. I mean, and it's just, I don't know that anyone could have predicted the shift that team has made this offseason. I mean, we all knew they were in cap trouble, but apparently it was worse than we thought by trading their best offensive asset outside of Drew Brees. So yeah, I'm looking for and like you said, we'll cover it later, but I'm not very optimistic for them this year, Scotty.
Well, I don't want to curse my beloved Carolina Panthers with any smack talk against the hated rival Saints, but yeah, they're in a spot.
Are you kidding? You lifted the curse of D'Angelo Williams, Scott. You're free.
I love D'Angelo Williams and will always love him. So he can be a Steeler on Sundays, but he's a Panther the rest of the week in my mind. A couple of other running back gainers that I think are interesting. Theo Riddick of the Lions and Carlos Hyde of the 49ers. I think we hit on Hyde quite a bit last week, or a month ago, presuming that Frank Gore wouldn't be back. That's true. It seems like he's the number one guy there, but Riddick really could benefit from Reggie Bush also being a 49er now. I think that could really open him up to 40-plus catches this season, playing that sort of Bush role. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I don't think there's he's got a very high floor, let's say that. I mean, Detroit has shown no indication of making any changes to their offensive game plan. So, yeah, I think you can still look for a lot of pass attempts there. And look, Riddick is the passing down back now, and I don't envision them going any other avenue to fill that role. So I think he's got it pretty much locked up.
Another player who's really benefited from some departures on his own team is my boyfriend Marlon Brown of the Baltimore Ravens. With Torrey Smith also on your 49ers. What is up with the 49ers just signing everybody relevant here? But anyway.
We're getting desperate after the Super Bowl. We just want any reminder from that game that we can hold on to. So
yeah, you've had an exodus of your own, but
pretty soon we're going to get Ray Lewis out of retirement, Scott, and he's going to come play for us. So
well, there are some openings there at the linebacker spot, so that would make sense. I've long been a fan of Marlon Brown ever since he was sort of forced into duty his freshman year 2 years ago, and performed very well. He's a very tall player, maybe not super physical, just he's a bit undersized given his height, but I still think he could be a legitimate red zone weapon, and there's not a lot of competition for targets on that team right now. I think he could really have a breakout season this year. Any other gainers in your mind?
Well, yeah, but just on that Marlon Brown note, Scott, they've also got Mark Trestman that brought in as offensive coordinator, which he's very pass-friendly, as we all know from his Bears days. So, yeah, I'm with you. And I think it's probably likely the Ravens draft a receiver pretty high, but, yeah, I mean, Marlon Brown is he's pretty much it at this point. So, receivers, and this might be a little different, but I like, you know what? I think T.Y. Hilton probably benefited from what the Colts did, personally. I mean, and I know you had some notes, and we'll cover it later. But look, I don't think anyone can disagree that having Andre Johnson opposite you is a huge upgrade over what Reggie Wayne was last year, and the ghost of Hakeem Nicks. So, which look is even better for Andrew Luck and the supporting cast. So. I think Hilton, for those that may have thought last year was a fluke, I think they can sleep easy now.
Let's just go ahead and get started with the divisional previews because we're going to start with Indianapolis and the AFC South, and I think this is obviously going straight into it. As Michael indicated there, the big move for the Colts is bringing in Andre Johnson from the Texans, who had a bit of a down year last year with only 936 receiving yards and is getting up there in age, but is still a physically imposing receiver. And as you mentioned, is replacing Reggie Wayne and Hakeem Nicks, neither of whom was particularly productive last season. Do you think Johnson can still be a 1,000-yard receiver, especially now that he's in an offense that's a bit better in terms of the quarterback and in terms of the passing game?
Oh, I definitely think so. Like I mentioned, it was sort of addition by subtraction anyway before Johnson got there, and plugging him into that role, I think, is a no-brainer. I mean, is he going to be the top target in Indianapolis like he was in Houston? Probably not, but look, I'm still an Andre Johnson fan. I think he's still got a lot left in the tank. And look, there's something to be said for the extra motivation he'll have to sort of stick it to Houston. So, yeah, I'm looking for a very motivated Andre Johnson this year.
So what happens to Dante Moncrief? I think we were all waiting for him to get an increased role this year. 32 catches, 444 yards, and 3 touchdowns last season as a rookie. And just based on some of the per route sort of metrics, 1.74 yards per route run, that was better than both Wayne and Nicks last year. In my mind, he looked ready to make an impact. And at 6'2", 221, he's a bigger guy too. Does this just put his future a little bit on hold, or maybe the Colts can do with all 3 receivers, making them all fantasy productive? Or do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you got to remember, Moncrief didn't necessarily start off hot because he was a rookie. I mean, it takes some time, unless you're Odell Beckham, to just step right in and start, torching the world. So, no, I still like Moncrief. I mean, look, is he going to be a wide receiver 2 like his upside could have been if he was starting? Probably not. But look, I mean, the last time I think a team had 3,000-yard receivers was the Colts. It was either the Colts or the Cardinals. So I'm not predicting 1,000 yards for Moncrief, but do I think he can improve on his 444-yard season? Yeah, I think he could.
Okay, good. I think that generally covers the receivers, but there's also a really major impact here on the running game. Blissfully, Trent Richardson is no longer the running back here in his 3.3 yards per attempt from last season. So we're done with that nightmare. But it comes Frank Gore, a huge favorite of both of ours. The question is, does Gore really have anything left at the tank at this point, Michael?
You know, he obviously did last year. I mean, he actually increased his yards per carry year over year from 4.1 to 4.3. But as you mentioned, with his age, there's always the chance that he's going to fall off a cliff at any point. I mean, I think that's just reality. So. Do I think it's an upgrade over Richardson? Yeah, but I kind of think you could have been an upgrade over Trent Richardson.
Yeah, you've never seen me run, Michael. I'm the slowest man alive.
Well, yeah. So either way, I think it's an upgrade. An interesting note, though, and not that this will have a giant effect, Scott, that I looked up, but even according to our own Pro Football Focus stats, Trent Richardson actually was more efficient pass blocking than Frank Gore was last year. So,
interesting.
Again, not to say that the Colts' receiving game is going to suffer because Frank Gore's there. He's still a very good pass blocker as well. But, yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, look, as we sit here today, do I think there's a better chance of the run game improving? Yeah, but at the same time, you've got a 30-something-year-old that you're giving the rock to. So I could just as easily see it go down in flames.
Yeah, I guess it's a sort of a high-risk, high-reward pick because, honestly, I could see Gore really being productive this year. One of the reasons he's sort of fallen by the fantasy wayside in recent seasons is because his receptions totals have just disappeared over the last few years. I think that really was speaking to the 49ers offense. I mean, Gore has always had the ability to catch the ball. It just hasn't had the targets the last couple of years. He'll probably get a lot more with the Colts this season. I mean, we saw Ahmad Bradshaw. I think Bradshaw caught like 6 touchdowns last year or something crazy and caught quite a bit of balls out of the backfield. I think Gore could do that this year. So even if his total volume of touches goes kind of down a little bit, he may be productive just across the gamut in that way that makes him sort of a sneaky back-end running back too. But again, the age is the question. A lot more fantasy stuff here because obviously Andrew Luck can spread the wealth. What do you think about the tight end situation? Coby Fleener had something of a breakout year last year with 51 catches, 774 yards, and 8 touchdowns. How legitimate is he as a fantasy tight end?
I think he's legitimate just as a function of being in that offense, quite honestly. And, I wasn't really a fan last year, but looking back, sort of at the a little deeper in the numbers, he actually had 1.63 yards per route run, which was actually good for 9th last year. So not a bad number. Now, his drop rate was 10%, which that's not very good. But I think just as a function of being in that offense, he's going to be fantasy relevant. And, and look, I'm sure we'll cover this down the road, but it's not like there's a whole lot of terribly good options at tight end unless you have Rob Gronkowski. So, could he be a plug-and-play tight end 1 on a lot of weeks? Yeah, probably. And look, the same thing goes for Dwayne Allen, assuming both are healthy. It's just one of those you don't know what the Colts' game plan is going to call for that week.
Well, that's the weird thing. Both Fleener and Allen had 8 touchdown receptions last year. That probably had a little bit to do with the fact that Wayne and Nix just weren't up to snuff. And I'm wondering if the addition of Johnson, who, although has never really been a touchdown threat through most of his career in Houston, is a bigger body. And then you have Moncrief as well. There are a lot of other options for touchdowns this season. I wouldn't be surprised if Fleener had closer to 5 this year. But still, he can be a very productive tight end with 700 passing or reception yards and 5 touchdowns. So, yeah, legitimate top 10 guy. Okay, are there any holes here on Indianapolis? We just rattled off a ton of fantasy-relevant guys. Is there anything that you think they may still try to look at maybe in the draft this year?
As far as the skill positions, I think we've pretty much determined they're set. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, if they had a shot at one of the top-tier running backs, could they reach for it? Maybe. I mean, honestly, would that be that bad of an idea? You've got Gore, who's 32 or 33, but if Melvin Gordon or Todd Gurley are there, I don't think that would be unreasonable for them to draft that. Now, that's not to say they don't have bigger problems, especially on the offensive line, but it seems like every year we're always saying the offensive line for them, and they don't do anything to address it. So, I could see them doing, short of quarterback and receiver, I could see them doing anything, really.
Maybe. I'm a little curious if the whole Trent Richardson, Ahmad Bradshaw situation may have taught them a lesson about investing picks and money in running backs. We'll see. All right, next up, Houston. A little bit less exciting from a fantasy perspective, obviously, and obviously they're the team that lost Andre Johnson this offseason. So I think that leaves us with the major fantasy question of how high can DeAndre Hopkins go? Is top 10 receiver out of the question? I think you're a little bit more pessimistic of Hopkins than I am, so talk me through what your thoughts are with Hopkins.
Well, it concerns me on two accounts. One, he's lost Andre Johnson, which even though Andre Johnson had a subpar year for Andre Johnson, he still drew attention from the defense. So that opened DeAndre Hopkins up a little bit. And as you and I talked a little bit more in depth on G-Chat today, they don't have a quarterback. I'm sorry. I don't think defenses are scared by either Brian Hoyer or Ryan Mallett. And look, you replace Andre Johnson with Cecil Short. It's not exactly like intimidating. And I would be scared that he would just draw way more attention than he was used to and not be able to, to be productive. I mean, look, his big thing, I think we can agree, is the long ball. He averages 15 yards a catch. So unless he's able to keep that up, or unless they just start feeding him the ball next year, I have my doubts. That's just me. I know you are you're way more optimistic on him than I am.
Well, Hopkins did have 2.27 yards per route run last year. That was 13th of 90 qualifiers. A lot of his peripheral stats like that sort of back him up as a legit number one, but I agree that the help around him could be a little short. But I would be totally fine drafting Hopkins as a wide receiver too this season.
Sure. I think wide receiver too would be a great value, but I think people just have to be cautious if they're going to draft him to be a top 10 option.
What I think helps about this is now you have a clearer pecking order than we had last year. Both Johnson and Hopkins, I mean, I guess Hopkins hadn't really established himself entering the year, but that was a little bit more 1A, 1B situation. Now with Shorts, I think Hopkins is the clear guy. But, Shorts has had periods in Jacksonville, another offense with some challenges passing the ball. He has some fantasy relevance there. Do you think he can do anything at all this year with Houston?
Look, DeAndre Hopkins had, I believe it was 1,200 yards last year, and Andre Johnson had 900. Now, that's not to say Cecil Shorts is Andre Johnson, but I think the opportunity's there. I mean, look, they did it with the quarterback triumvirate of Ryan Fitzpatrick, Mallett for a little bit, and then I believe even Tom Savage got some reps in there for some reason. So it's possible. It's certainly possible, but I would not be hopeful on that front, Scotty.
Yeah, for me with Shorts, it's all about injuries. He's never played more than 14 games in a season, and because of that, he's had trouble reaching. He's never reached 1,000 yards. Never. I think he's got 4 touchdowns, maybe the last 2 years combined. I mean, it's been an injury-plagued career. I think that makes him just too risky to draft in this kind of offense in any kind of standard format.
Well, and they got the 16th pick, Scott, in the draft, so it is entirely possible they get, one of those top receivers that's in this year's class to play opposite Hopkins, and quite honestly, ideally draw some attention away. That's what I would be hoping for.
You may be right. You mentioned the former New England backups at quarterback between Mallett and Hoyer. Do you have any thoughts on who's going to start? Do you care?
That's my thought.
Okay, that's a fair thought.
No.
So by that extension, I think we're saying that quarterback may be a position of need, but again, with a mid-first round pick, there's not really anything they can do there in the draft, can they?
I don't think so, and I just don't understand it. I mean, like you and I talked before, it would seem like, hey, this is prime time for them to make a move, not wait another year to either draft a quarterback or bring one in. And I think we've learned you cannot sign quarterbacks off the street. That just doesn't happen. It's very rare to get a playoff caliber starter, either through trade or through a signing. So I don't really understand. If I had to put money on it, I would say Mallett, only because they had the opportunity to let him go and they didn't. They brought him back, and look, I think they still want to see what they have with him. They attempted last year before he got hurt through like the first half that he played. So if I had to put money on it, I would say him. But again, I'm still not quite sure if that does anything for anyone.
So you're not even a top 20 quarterback for 2 quarterback league types, right?
If they
no is a fine answer. That's fine.
I'm gonna say no. Yeah, let's just call it what it is. I'll say no.
Yeah, let's just move on. Let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. Another great fantasy story.
God, it's worse.
Yeah, we're loving the AFC South today. Major fantasy storyline. I think it's pretty clearly Bishop Sankey. Can he become a legitimate running back? I will notice that last year Sankey 2.51 yards after contact per attempt. Pretty solid number right there. But Sean Green 2.44 yards after contact per attempt. I know people hate Sean Green with like a fiery passion, but he's fine. I don't know. Do you think Sankey can actually get the workload to be a real running back this year?
For some reason, I just get like the Trent Richardson feeling all over again. Like Trent Richardson had a fairly decent yards after contact as well, but again, his problem was getting past the contact, was getting past the offensive line, and I don't know, man. I mean, Sankey, for the season, he had, what was it? I think it was 3.7 yards a carry. He only had 5 games out of the entire 16-game season of averaging more than 4 yards a carry. So it's just, oh God, it's just very dicey for me. I don't trust it. I really don't. I don't expect him to make any sort of leap forward. That's just me, though.
it would be really helpful if the Titans could do a little bit in the passing game to take some defensive attention away from the running game. But I'm not sure if that's really in the.
Are you saying Harry Douglas is not the answer, Scott? What are you saying?
I'm getting there. So yeah, they let Jake Locker go, who I think is retiring. Nate Washington is no longer here, which is shocking. I feel like he was just immortal and was always going to be on this team. But they add Harry Douglas pretty much completely under the radar in my mind. Justin Hunter, who I've been a big fan of previously, just can't catch the ball still. I mean, 20% drop rate last year was the worst among all receivers with 50 or more targets. He can't catch. I mean, I think we've sort of seen this situation before. It's got a little Stephen Hillishness to it, which is disappointing. But, if Hunter can't catch, is Douglas maybe fantasy relevant?
Only from the standpoint that he could be the wide receiver 1 on a team. Yes, that's the only scenario. I mean, yeah, I don't look.
He can catch 90 balls. I guess Kendall Wright is kind of in that mix too, so there's not enough there.
I would still say Kendall Wright is the top of that pecking order, and I still look Delanie Walker personally. I'm still a fan of. I think he's got the potential to be a top 12 tight end, more so just because there's not many other options than it's Delanie Walker. But
come on, my boy Delanie Walker. Don't I have him in like the top 6 of dynasty tight ends? I love that
Probably. Guy. No, he finds a way. And just to sort of segue, I think the theme here is they don't have a quarterback. That's sort of what the problem is. And I'm gonna get a little crazy, Scott. So just bear with me, okay?
I like crazy. Let's do this.
I know there's a lot of speculation that they'll draft a quarterback, probably Mariota second, but I would be okay if they went with the consensus pick after that, which would be Leonard Williams out of USC for the defensive line. Yeah. I'm okay with Mettenberger.
No, I like it.
I mean, look, here's his numbers. He had a 7.9 yards per attempt last year, a full yard better than Teddy Bridgewater, mind you, okay? He had a 59.8 completion percentage compared to 64 for Bridgewater, so Bridgewater did have him handily beat on that front. But it was a percentage point better than Blake Bortles, who we'll get to later. So I'm not exactly like knocking. I'm okay with Mettenberger, and they were 29. Their offensive line was in pass blocking. So if you can improve the offensive line just a smidge, and look, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with Ryan Mettenberger next year.
Interesting thought. Do you know some of our fancy signature stats that we have at Pro Football Focus? They're really fun. I was dorking out on them in preparation for this.
I know
you're not. It's not even relevant. Do you know who was the #1 in accuracy percentage when under pressure last year?
Tell me it was Zach Mettenberger.
No, that would be awesome.
Oh.
It was Teddy Bridgewater, though. So a rookie was the best passer under pressure last year. That's a little bit of a teaser for our North show, which is
I was going to say, I think you and I are on the same page there, but
yeah, I think everybody in fantasy is on the page of that guy's a star. But we'll get to that in future weeks. Back to Mettenberger, though. Didn't see him a ton last year. Based on PFF's overall rating, -7.1 in 313 snaps. Not great, but not Bortles bad. So I don't know.
As we talked about, he has no one to pass it to.
It's 100% true, and bad offensive line situation. So, I mean, not that Bortles doesn't, but
I would take him. Look, I'd take a flyer on him, man. I really would.
You mean in fantasy?
Oh yeah, I would.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How deep a league are you talking about? 2 quarterbacks, 16 teams, or something? Or do you think standard league relevant?
Probably not standard league relevant. Not if it's not 2 quarterback, but 2 quarterback. If I had my other positions pretty solid, I might roll with that.
Okay, I think that's fair. What else from the Titans? They signed Anthony Fasano. That's no big deal for Delanie Walker, right?
No, I would hope not. If it is, then Anthony Fasano strikes again, and we truly need to just get out of the way of Anthony Fasano because he's truly not human. So I think the offense is in shambles, and hopefully they can get some help for Mettenberger. The defense looks like it's coming around. I mean, they do look like they could be pretty solid, but yeah, they've got a long way to go on that offense.
All right, well then let's just proceed to Jacksonville, another great fantasy destination. We were just talking about it a second ago. Is Bortles just too bad to help out the talented skill position players, or is there some hope for him in the future?
Oh, man, I'll say this: they're giving him every opportunity to be pretty good. I mean, signing
I know, right?
signing Julius Thomas is look. That's a clear-cut sign that they're all in on Bortles. They're trying to do everything they can. It's not a free agent signing, but Justin Blackmon might be back, which would be very beneficial for them. I mean, and that gives them 4 decent targets for Bortles to pass to. Now, the run game's a little different story. I mean, they were 25th. The offensive line was in run blocking, and yeah, I mean, they had Denard Robinson for I don't know, a little bit, but I don't know that he's the answer. So, and that's another team that early second round could draft a guy like Gurley or Gordon if they're still around. But I think this is Bortles' put up or shut up year, and if he can't do it this year, I think they're done.
Yeah, let's talk through the passing game first. I mentioned a second ago that Bridgewater was number 1 in accuracy percentage when under pressure. That was 75.2% accurate. Bortles was 25th of 27 qualifiers in that stat, 53.3%. He just couldn't handle the pressure, and let me tell you, it was constant. Negative 61.2 rated offensive line, not good. His overall negative 31.9 rating, not good. So I'm not sure he's good, but he's definitely not getting any help from the offensive line from a protection standpoint. That's a major issue. Hopefully one day can at least rectify a little bit, but I just, at this point, there's no drafting Bortles. But what about some of these wide receivers? We'll get to Julius Thomas in a second, but last year Allen Robinson was very interesting to me in fantasy before he got hurt. 1.64 yards per route run is fine, especially on that team. Then you had Allen Hurns, who kept popping up every now and then, Marquise Lee, another high-drafted wide receiver. With all of those guys there, is there one or any that are screaming to you as maybe a fantasy sleeper this year?
I would still love to have Allen Robinson on my team. I think when he played, he was fairly consistent. I mean, he did have a season-ending injury that prevented him from finishing out. But when he was installed as the starter, yeah, he strung together, I think, a couple of 5-reception, 80-yard games pretty consistently. So, and look, again, if you were to put Justin Blackmon across from him with Julius Thomas, I mean, that's a pretty stout receiving core, especially for the AFC South. So he would probably be the guy that I would most bank on. For me, Hurns and Lee were just too inconsistent. I mean, I think, if there wasn't competition and they had the job all to themselves, they might be worth something. But there's just too many mouths to feed there that if I were to bank on one, it'd still be Robinson.
I think that's definitely true with Robinson, but Lee, I mean, still has Dynasty League relevance, right? Or are you telling the Dynasty owners to just get rid of him?
You love Marquise Lee, Scott. You do not let him go.
Well, it's kind of weird, too, considering how many terrible USC wide receivers my Panthers drafted. But, yeah, I don't know. He was really good in college. I don't know what to say.
He was. There's no doubt. But for me, let's put it this way. On my Dynasty Stock Watch article, I'd probably put him in the sell side instead of the buy side.
Okay, that's interesting.
So,
I think maybe one of your sell guys might have been Julius Thomas in recent weeks. Is that true? Is he helpless without Peyton Manning, or is there something here?
I'm not going to say he's helpless. And look, like we've mentioned before, the lack of exceptional tight end targets in fantasy, I think he could still be a tight end 1. Now, is he going to challenge Gronkowski or Travis Kelce for tight end supremacy? Probably not, but that's just based on volume. But is he still going to be, I think, a big part of that offense there? I think he is, and I think he could still be a starter. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the bar for a starter tight end is set pretty low at this point. So, right. Sure, of course.
If we're saying Delaney Walker's on the fringe, then I'm pretty sure Julius Thomas can make that leap.
But you're looking at a cap of 8 touchdowns now instead of 15, right? I mean, it's
Look,
a pretty devastating thing to his value.
Yeah, I don't think he'll ever have another 3-touchdown game again like he did in Denver.
Yeah, that's a shame. The running backs, speaking of shames, woo. So Toby Gerhart last year, 2.17 yards after contact per attempt. Not that good for a guy that you expect to be sort of your battering ram to deal with that bad offensive line. Denard Robinson was basically right there at 2.11, and there's a guy that runs away from contact, at least he tries to. The team also just picked up Bernard Pierce last week after he was arrested and released by the Ravens. I don't really know what to make of this. Robinson had a stint of about a month last year when he was a very productive running back in fantasy, but unless there's major overhauls coming to the offensive line, I have a hard time taking anybody here in the top 45 at the position. Do you have any more optimism than that?
No, I think that's pretty spot on. I mean, look, I think it's fairly likely they go offensive line in the draft. I mean, they do have the 3rd overall pick, so they're going to have their choice of the top lineman in the draft. But other than that, yeah, I mean, look, Robinson is not a featured back, and I don't think they even view him as a featured back. Ideally, he's the change of pace back. And look, they brought in Gerhardt for a reason. They meant for him to be that 1st and 2nd down guy that can get 4 yards a carry, and he just couldn't do it. So, and they brought in Pierce, but look, let's face it, Pierce is living off the name he made his rookie year, and that was 3 years ago. He hasn't had a decent season on the field since then, and he sure as hell hasn't had a good season off of it since then either. So, yeah, that seems like a move that they were grasping for straws. So, yeah, I think the Jacksonville running game is radioactive and one that should be avoided at all costs.
All right. Well, then let's go ahead and get out of the AFC South because that was super depressing.
Thank God.
Let's move over to the depressing NFC South featuring my beloved Carolina Panthers. Let's start with them. I don't know. I've hit this record a billion times in my life, but Jonathan Stewart, what do you think, Michael?
I'm a fan. Look,
yeah.
we're on the same page on this. When he has played, when he has been on the field, he has been highly effective. Okay, and he's still like we've talked about this. Because of the injuries that he's sustained, he still has a lot of life left in those legs. I think he still can be very productive. And mercifully, they cut D'Angelo Williams. I know you hated to see him go, Scott, and you could still get his jersey probably for a very discounted rate. But yeah, I'm a big fan, man. I mean, look, the Carolina offense, the team in general, I think is fairly underrated. I mean, I got some other stats too, but yeah, I think he has the potential to be a running back 1 this year.
Okay.
Based on the fact that I think it's a skill. B, and more importantly, there's just no one behind him to challenge him for carries. They're just not. I mean, who else is there behind him? I don't think they have. I mean, Mike Tolbert is not going to vulture carries from him, right?
I mean,
he's on the team. Yeah. Look,
I don't know.
Jonathan Stewart, if he can stay healthy, will be a running back 1. You can mark that down.
Okay. I'm going to bring you down a little bit. He can't be a running back 1 because he can't score touchdowns. You know he can't. Cam Newton is going to take those from him. I think he's capped at about 7 or 8 touchdowns for the year. That said, I'm still going to defend him. I think he is a very good runner. Last year, 72.8 elusive rating. That was 2nd in the NFL behind Marshawn Lynch of 42 qualified backs. He was tremendous when he touched the ball. Another reason he has a lot of miles left on him is because he split time with D'Angelo Williams that whole time, even when he was healthy. And he's just 28 years old. So agreed, a lot left in the tank. He had 486 rushing yards over his last 5 games, so you're talking a full season pace of 1,500 rushing yards. I think that's a bit optimistic, but I think 1,200 is definitely in play. I just don't think the touchdown total is going to support him being a running back 1, but running back 2, absolutely I could see that.
I want the record to show, Scott, that I said running back 1 right here.
Great.
Assuming he plays at least 15 games.
That's silly. You can't just assume that. So, in other words, don't draft him as a running back 1, and don't draft him even as a running back 2, but draft him as a running back 3 and expect to get a pretty good production when he is healthy and on the field, which I think he can be. We'll see.
He can, but on that point, Scott, I could very easily see, and this isn't a case, it almost seems like a case of, like, I'm one of those people that has those stock shows that start drumming up a stock so that everyone goes and buys it so I can sell it, but I could totally see his ADP just, like, shooting through the roof. Because for the fact that there's just not that many workhorse backs left. That's just not the league now, So unless they bring someone highly rated in the draft, I could see him being drafted, higher than you may even expect him to be.
Maybe. People have been burned by the Panthers too many times to start trusting it until they see it, though. I'll believe it when it happens. I guess we'll find out.
All right. Fair enough.
Okay. This probably won't make everyone super enthused, but let's talk about their defense briefly. They've lost Greg Hardy, who signed with the Cowboys. What to make of them as a potential fantasy defense? Obviously, 2 years ago, they were one of the very elites. And then last year, they were just terrible early in the season, but then righted the ship later when some of their drafted secondary guys like Bené Benwikere and Trey Boston kind of worked their way into the starting lineup. Do you think that this defense is potentially a top 5 fantasy defense, or do you think they're not even draftable? I feel like there's a lot of potential opinions here.
Yeah, I personally, I think they're pretty underrated. I mean, I went back; they were top 10 in yards allowed per game last season, which surprised me quite honestly. I mean, I would have thought without Greg Hardy they would have taken a big dive, but they didn't. They finished 13th in sacks, which again they were better with Greg Hardy on the field, but still not terrible. So. I think, like you said, they've got some guys that have progressed, or hopefully will have progressed. They can still address some of those holes in the draft. So I think there's pretty good value there. And look, we've covered this before on the podcast. Defenses are just hard to predict year over year. And, you know, look, it's very possible to stream them through the entire season. And could Carolina be one that you stream based on the matchup as your top defense for that week? I think so. Why not? They still got Luke Kuechly in the middle. They still have Thomas Davis. They still have Charles Johnson. I mean, they still got a lot of good players there that, yes, it would be better with Greg Hardy, but they also played without Greg Hardy last year, and they finished as a top 10 defense. So I'm still positive on that.
Yeah. I like the Panthers defense a lot, especially because I think you'll be able to get them near the end of the top 10. And if I'm a guy that's waiting on defense, which I always am, I think that's a team that could really surprise and be really good again. In fact, over the last 4 or 5 games, I think they were nearly back to that level from the previous season. And I think you could see that again this year. It helps, too, that the rest of the division could have some problems, which we'll get to in a minute. What else is here for the Panthers? You know, I didn't even write down Cam Newton. Is he worth discussing? Are people back on him being a top 5 quarterback, or did last year sort of derail people from that opinion?
Well, he's a guy that just elicits so many different opinions. I think like you mentioned, I mean, you've got some people that have never wavered in the fact that he's a top 5 guy, and some people that wouldn't draft him as a quarterback 1. I don't understand it. I'm still a big Cam Newton fan, and look, Kelvin Benjamin can only get better. I think we can agree that Jonathan Stewart should be better. And look, hopefully they address that in the draft as far as another receiver and another option for him. So I don't know. I still would think he's a top 5 option, don't you? As objectively as you can say.
Yeah, for sure. He was so much healthier after he got in that car wreck. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, and look, actually, and that's a very good point. He's had an entire offseason to honestly heal and to get healthy. And barring any other, automobile incidents this offseason, he should be good to go. And look, he'll have a full roster of guys healthy with Benjamin having a year under his belt. Greg Olsen seemingly will never die. So, yeah, I'm still a big fan of Cam.
Yeah, the team was reluctant to let him run earlier in the year, again, coming off that ankle surgery. But I think by the end, again, you started to see the old Cam. So I think I will. Let's rattle off the top 5 quarterbacks, given the moves and things that have happened so far. I feel like we're still pretty clear that Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Luck are 1 and 2, right? Who are your 3, 4, and 5 just off the top of your head right now? Sam Bradford, right?
No, that will be later. But Nick Foles. So.
Foles. Yeah, Rams starter. That's good. Okay, really though, number 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, and this I should say this. This won't be in any particular order, but I'm still a big fan of Russell Wilson. I think just what he can do with his legs is it's very impressive. And now with Jimmy Graham, it's just, again, as a 49er fan, seemingly unstoppable. I would still put Cam up there because, look, every year he has proven that he can still produce, whether he has receivers or not, whether he has an offensive line or not, and he's still in his prime. So I would still put him up there. And to round that out, and this is so risky, but I'd probably still go Peyton Manning at the top 5. I mean, I still think the opportunity's there. I know they brought in Kubiak to run that sort of zone blocking scheme, but look, it's still Peyton Manning. He still has Demaryius Thomas. I would still be okay with him if he were my quarterback.
Yeah, that may have been an exercise of what are the quarterback tiers, and there's a top tier with 2 guys and then the rest. But, I think I'd rather have Cam than Russell Wilson. I think Cam's going to score more touchdowns, and I think he's going to have like 50 to 75 more pass attempts this year. So count me in as a fan of Cam. They do need to do some things at the wide receiver position probably. They brought Ted Ginn Jr. back, but I think that's really all about the special teams at this point. I wrote down that maybe Michael Crabtree is a fit, but I've heard that he's potentially going to Miami. But Greg Jennings, I've heard recently, as a name that they've been kicking around. That actually makes a lot of sense to me. You want more the route runner type to pair against the really bigger body. So I could see that. I don't think anybody else they're going to be adding is going to be fantasy relevant. Even if they draft a guy, probably not this year. But again, you have your big 2 guys and then Cam. I think they're going to be fine with those guys in fantasy. Anything else of interest here for the Panthers?
No, Jonathan Stewart, fantasy MVP. Put it down.
Number 1 running back. Lock it up. All right, let's move on to the New Orleans Saints, where we teased about this earlier. Mass exodus. So we talked about them trading away Jimmy Graham. We didn't even mention that they also traded away Kenny Stills to the Dolphins. What receivers are left? I mean, Brandon Cooks was fairly effective. It would have seemed a lot more effective in the year where every rookie wasn't amazing. But 53 catches for 550 and 3 touchdowns in 10 games before he got hurt and knocked out for the year. I mean, Cooks is like the guy now, right? Like, what is his ceiling this year?
It's all, like we said before, it's very up in the air right now. I mean, yes, they still have Drew Brees and they still have Sean Payton, but, it could be very different. Their pass to run ratio could be a lot closer this year than in years past. So, look, I think Cooks is still in line for 1,000 yards just by default, meaning I don't know if there's anyone else there that's going to be warranting targets. I mean, we have learned, I think, that Marcus Colston just will not die, so he will get his. And he did restructure, so he will be there again. You can guarantee it. But, look, they brought back Mark Ingram when they didn't have to, quite honestly. I mean, they paid probably more than they wanted to, but they did. They brought in C.J. Spiller on a pretty good deal, so I could see them sort of reeling in the pass attempts, or at least reeling in the deep bombs and throwing a lot of stuff, in the middle or even in the flat or something like that. So I think Cooks is still in line for 1,000 yards. Do I think his ceiling is as high as it may have been as we thought last year? Probably not.
Interesting. I'm going the other way with this, and this has never really happened before. But I just don't think Brees has ever had this sort of setup before, where I think Cooks is going to catch 1,400 yards this year. Like, it just seems to me like he's the clear primary option here, and he's just so much better and more versatile a threat than anybody else they have. I think he's going to get tons and tons of targets. So I'm sort of deciding this now, but definitely count me in among those that think Cooks is ready to break out this season. Is there anybody else? I mean, we've seen this before back when Colston was the guy. Random dudes would just pop up and catch 1,000 yards or like 8 touchdowns or whatever else. Do any of these other receivers interest you?
I think you're asking if we'll have another like Robert Meacham sighting or something like that.
Sure.
No, yeah. Right. No. The Kenny Stills thing, I really didn't understand because he was still cheap. It's not like that was a cost-cutting maneuver. He was still a cheap option. I mean, why they wouldn't, maybe cut Colston and keep Stills to go with Cooks, I don't really know, but they did. So I could see them drafting another receiver in the draft to pair with Colston and Cooks. I mean, in that Jimmy Graham trade, they did get Max Unger from Seattle, so that will help the offensive line a little bit, which is one less hole to fill in the draft. So I could see them, drafting a receiver fairly high in the draft, and that guy potentially being a contributor.
Yeah, Unger definitely did address one of their major holes last year, negative 34.3 rated offensive line, not very good. But then again, they were the second worst defense in football last year, negative 104.6 rating, ahead of only the Redskins. So they could very easily spend all of their draft picks on the defensive side of the football, and this is what we're left with on the offensive side. You mentioned a little bit about the running backs. They brought back Mark Ingram. They added C.J. Spiller. Ingram was quite effective last year. 2.38 yards after contact per attempt was decent. Really held up nicely under the full workload, so I think that'll be coming back for him this year. Spiller to me is the more interesting guy. Everyone's going to be disappointed because he seemed like an obvious guy that might get a job. He never really became the guy, I guess, in Buffalo because Fred Jackson is awesome. But that clearly is going to be the case again this year. But here's a thought that I had. Spiller isn't a similar body type necessarily, but he is a similarly explosive player. Darren Sproles caught 75 catches for 3 straight seasons with this team. Could Spiller just all of a sudden catch 80 balls this year? We're like, where are all the weapons here on this team? Well, there's a guy that can catch the ball and can be dangerous in space. Can Spiller just blow up in PPR leagues this year?
Oh, I definitely think he could. I think he could top out as a running back too in PPR leagues. Personally, I mean, like you mentioned, you had Darren Sproles averaging 75 catches a year. I think Pierre Thomas had 77 the year before last. So
yeah, by the by, Pierre Thomas was cut. We didn't mention that, so that sort of erases quite a few targets from this team.
Oh yeah, I think. And look, I think we can agree Spiller just as a football player in a vacuum is a better player than both Pierre Thomas and Darren Sproles were when they were in New Orleans. At least I would say that. So
well,
yeah,
Darren Sproles is awesome, but whatever.
No, I get that. I realize it's blasphemy to say that. But look, we'll get to that in the NFC East podcast because he's about 4th on the pecking order now. But yeah, no, I would not be surprised at all if Spiller had 80 catches. I really wouldn't.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a great option, even in standard leagues, as maybe a flex consideration. Because I think he could really see a lot of touches, again, because of the lack of other real talent at skill positions on this team. And I think we should go ahead.
Well, and a point that I was making before, with the lack of true workhorse backs, you need to find value in running backs in other places, and this is it. I mean, look, he will never reach 1,000 yards rushing, at least not as long as he's in New Orleans and Mark Ingram is healthy. So this is how he can make up for it. I mean, look, if he gets 80 catches and he's averaging, 8 yards a catch, you're looking at 600 yards receiving. And in PPR leagues, look, the catches plus the yardage is going to equal a guy running for 1,400 yards. So.
All right, PPR pop quiz. Would you rather have C.J. Spiller this year or the aforementioned Theo Riddick on Detroit?
Ooh, I'd still go Spiller. I think I just like him better as a player, and I like that situation more than in. Well, let's put it this way: I like the opportunity more for Spiller than with Riddick.
Yeah, I like both, but I think I like Spiller better too. What about Spiller versus Shane Vereen, who signed for the Giants, and we'll get there in future weeks too.
That's another good one. I probably would still go Spiller. I think he's just got the tools, man. And look, Vereen is a very good player, and I think he'll be very good value in PPR leagues, and I think he'll be good on the Giants. But if I had to pick one that I was going to bank on, I'd still go Spiller on that.
Yeah, I think Spiller's my odds-on favorite to lead running backs in receptions this year. So definitely am a fan. All right, let's move on to the Atlanta Falcons. Last year was a bit of a mess team. Not sure if their offseason has been that interesting from a fantasy perspective. They let Steven Jackson go. They let Jacquizz Rodgers go. So that potentially opens the door for Devontae Freeman as the starter. But he didn't really have that impressive a rookie year. 2.18 yards after contact per attempt compared to Steven Jackson's 2.68. He's kind of small, 5'8", 206. That may not be the greatest fit for a team that's just had notorious offensive line problems forever. Is there anything there with Freeman? He may get quite a bit of buzz this offseason, but I'm not sure I see him as a top 30 running back this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not there either. I mean, man, I know you probably remember. I remember the Devontae Freeman hype train last year at its apex, and unfortunately, I think I had a couple dynasty drafts at that same time. So, he probably went way higher than he should have, and way higher than he ended up that he should have. So, but I'm not there either. I mean, Atlanta is always they're always an interesting team for me because it always seems like they've got the main components to be a very good offense, and those main components always deliver, whether it's Julio or Matt Ryan, but it seems like they're perpetually looking for a running back or a tight end. I mean, ever since Tony Gonzalez retired, that they just haven't found that thing to fill yet. And now they've got, Quinn coming in as coach, which you would hope he doesn't model the offense after Seattle and try to find a pound it runner like Marshawn Lynch. But yeah, that team is just so odd to me. Like, the only guy this year that I would be okay having is Julio. And I still think Julio can be a top receiver despite quarterback or running back play. But, yeah, I don't know of anyone outside of Julio that I would want on that team. Do you?
Not especially. I mean, this actually reminds me a lot of New Orleans, where it's the team went all in a few years ago or over the last several years, and now they're kind of paying the piper, where they just don't have the cap space to address all their needs. This team has major defensive holes, major offensive line holes, and that's going to, again, prevent Matt Ryan from probably reaching his fantasy potential. It'll prevent whatever running back is on this team from being an elite fantasy option, even if they draft an elite guy. They're adding guys like Jacob Tamme and Tony Moeaki, so I think that tells you all you need to know there. Where outside of Julio Jones, I just don't think there's anybody to get very excited about here in fantasy.
Yeah, and look, I could see them. It's not impossible for them to draft a running back. Well, I shouldn't say with their first pick. They have the 8th pick. Hopefully they don't do that. But to get a running back or even a tight end in the 2nd round, that they could plug that hole with. So. But until they do, yeah, I'm avoiding Atlanta unless his name is Julio.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you there. All right, let's check out the last team tonight, and actually it's one that is surprisingly compelling in fantasy in my mind, the Tampa Bay Bucks. I think the major fantasy storyline is what they're doing with the #1 pick in the draft, which I think we all are pretty clear at this point. It's going to be Jameis Winston. So the next question then is, how much fantasy potential does Winston have, both this year and in the long run? What are your general thoughts on Winston, Michael?
I love him. I'm a huge fan, personally. Mm-hmm. He would automatically be in a 2-quarterback league. He'd be a starter for me in those types of leagues. I just think everything I've seen and read, and again, it's all speculation until it happens, but everything looks good. Tested well at the combine. He's not giving teams any problems. He tested out as apparently one of the smartest quarterbacks in 10 years. So, and look, the team that he's going to go to, Tampa, has a very compelling supporting cast. It's ready-made for him to do some damage pretty early on. I mean, whether it's Evans or Safarian Jenkins or even having Vincent Jackson there, I think he's got potential to be good from the get-go. And you know, like I said, he's definitely a top 20 option for me in redrafts, and you know, I think he's probably a top 3 for me in dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love Winston. This reminds me a lot of the Teddy Bridgewater situation from 2 years ago, where he peaked a year before he left school. So that gives everybody sort of a year to try to find reasons to not like him as much. But the truth of the matter is, Winston had 65% completion percentage in both of his seasons at Florida State. Another thing I love, 6'4", 230 pounds. He's a big guy. He ran in 7 touchdowns in his 2 seasons in school, too. I think you're going to get a sneaky 3 or 4 QB rushing touchdowns a year out of him, which can really make a huge difference. So I think that can really help raise his fantasy floor. And, again, the weapons, they're so enticing, and they're also so huge. I mean, we're all aboard the Mike Evans train, right? That guy's a top 10 wide receiver this year and forevermore. Yeah. But let's talk about Austin Safarian Jenkins. There's a guy that I've really liked. 6'6", 262-pound tight end, crazy athletic. Had some injuries, which is why he fell as far as he did in the draft originally. But 21 catches, 221 yards, and 2 touchdowns as a rookie. Not exactly exciting news, but then again, that's not that bad for a tight end in his first season. Again, that's the hardest position to make the transition to from the college level to the pro level on offense at the very least. It's just a lot of things to learn, a lot of responsibilities that you have to completely understand to not get your quarterback killed. So I think I have very little doubt that Safarian Jenkins will be a long-term really good tight end, but do you think this is the year that he can make that happen and become a fantasy option, or do you think that's more down the line?
No, I would be on board this year. I mean, I'm not quite ready to say he'd be a tight end 1 this year, but no, look, it's like you said, he's got all the physical tools, and look, it could be another case, like you mentioned with Bridgewater, of him peaking in college a year too early, and look, that abruptly affected his draft status. And look, you mentioned the stats, 21 for 221 and 2 touchdowns as a rookie, but look, I think it's fairly common knowledge. Rookie tight ends just don't produce their first year. They just don't. And you can't knock that production on him. I mean, look, if he repeats that this year with a year under his belt and Winston, hopefully at quarterback, then yes, we may have a problem. But no, I think I'm all aboard, and I think he'll greatly improve that stat line. And look, they've already indicated Vincent Jackson's probably going to be less a part of this offense, which is going to open up some targets and open up some receptions. So I think Safarian-Jenkins has a golden opportunity there.
Okay, let me put you on the spot with a little bit of another question here for Dynasty League players. You know we love Dynasty. You're a pretty much full-time Dynasty writer, which I love too. It's been several years, I think really since the Andrew Luck year, that we've been looking at quarterbacks as potential top of a rookie draft type of players. Do you think Winston is in that mix? Like, would you be thinking about him as a top 5 potential rookie guy? I know there's a lot of depth at wide receiver this year. Does that push him out, maybe even out of the first round? Where is the general spot that you would have him right now?
He would definitely personally be a top 5 rookie draft option for me. I mean, like you mentioned, there's just a lot of receivers out there, rookie receivers for dynasty drafts that I think because there is, that allows you to be a little more flexible at the position, meaning, look, you could afford to get someone like a Winston who I think is clearly above the rest of the quarterbacks in this class, including Mariota, that it pushes him to the top of drafts. And look, I think there may be a running back, or two that could maybe push that spot, but I just don't see a receiver that's a can't-miss prospect. Do you?
Well, I mean, there's several guys, but I'm not sure there's a clear consensus at the top. I would probably take the sort of elite guys there, but I think Winston may not be in my top 5 among rookies, but I think he's definitely in my top 8 or so, and that's the highest that I've taken a rookie quarterback since, I guess, Andrew Luck's year. It's been a while, so yeah, definitely interesting from a fantasy perspective there. Anything else on Tampa Bay that intrigues you, Michael?
No, I mean, look, I think as far as the skill positions, they're pretty set after they draft Winston. I mean, they're sort of remaking the defense, which again, that would help the offense, obviously. So, but look, Lovie Smith, he can work on the defense and hopefully just let Winston chuck it.
Okay, then I think that pretty much wraps up. We were going for it again tonight, Michael. Thanks for joining me for another great show. This is a Fantasy Slant from ProFootballFocus.com. We've got a couple of more, 4 more divisions to hit over the course of 2 shows, which we will definitely get in before the draft now that our lives are a little less hectic during this offseason. So look forward to that. Thanks for listening this far, and we'll catch you in future weeks.